Alright, so when should you copy someone else's technique, may it be your favorite lifter, someone that you see on Instagram, or someone maybe you feel is very similarly built to you. And I'm not gonna say you should never copy someone's technique because powerlifting we could say like everyone's built so differently and sabaijana को leverages different huncha. All of these things are really valid points, but we'll try and break it down to manageable pieces, so maybe then you can understand when you should copy someone's technique and you're not just blindly following what the particular best guy in the country or best guy on the internet is doing, because this is quite a common theme that we're seeing with lifters, not just in Nepal, even with my clients and all across the world, that we want to emulate certain lifters. And of course, I do that up to a point as well. But let's try and have a holistic approach and understand how certain things work in this context when we talk about lifting technique. So first thing, when we're looking at copying someone's technique, we have to look at individuals that are similarly built like us. Now, when we look at person who's similarly built, we just don't look at a certain height. So let's say I'm 5 feet 11 inches. So I don't just go myself comparing to every other athlete who is 5 feet 11 inches. It doesn't work like that. But we have to look at certain things, our leverages, how our femur is built, how our technique is naturally, what are the cues that these guys are implementing. And if it's very similar, then we could have a rough idea as to if this guy is benching a certain way, then even I might be able to do a certain type of a deadlift. So if I just, let's say, look at a good deadlifter from Nepal, let's say Mohit Dai, he is a really good conventional deadlifter, the first guy to deadlift 300 in Nepal. Now, when I look at his leverages, it looks really good for the deadlift. So he can really sit down into a proper squat, and then he can use a lot of knee extension, and then he looks relatively upright for a conventional deadlift. Whereas somebody like me, I have longer legs in comparison to Mohit Dai, and then my torso is a bit shorter. So my leverage is not going to look like him just because I'm just trying to copy the best deadlifter there is. My conventional deadlift looks more like a RDL or a stiff leg deadlift because my hips have to be in such a high position. And when we look at lifting, the same general cues apply to all of the athletes all across the country, and every other athlete. And then even when we're following the exact same general cues, we have to look at the more important things rather than just looking at the technique in itself. So let's say I can't look like Mohit Dai, but what are the other things that he's doing correctly? What are the other general cues that he's doing correctly? Yo hundakeri chai how is our technique similar in those sense bhanera chai I think we sort of fail to understand that part of the concept, because let's look at Mohit Dai's deadlift and my deadlift. So my hips are really high, but I'm doing sort of like an RDL, but the general cues are probably the same. We're still trying to hold a lot of center of mass and toe pressure when we're wedging into the barbell. We're optimally pulling slack. The bar path is straight, it's not rotating. Our bracing is proper. So these are the general cues. So when we look at trying to copy someone else, maybe we could look at somebody slightly different. And this is maybe for my squat, bench press and deadlift. I have inspirations from how my technique just came about. So in terms of my squat, let's say over the years, it has obviously graduated. I used to be a quote unquote like a perfect squatter, like ekdamai upright, very high barish, ekdamai Olympic lifter, sort of a squatter. But then over the years, now working with my current coach, I see a lot of similarities in how we're built. Of course, he's a lot shorter than me, he's a lot stronger than me, and then he does certain things way better. But when I look at his squat, I can emulate certain things, because if he had to, he could probably squat like a perfect Olympic lifter as well. But he involves a lot of quads utilization with hinge and proper bracing pattern and knee movement pattern. And I see a lot of similarities when it comes to our squatting leverages. Even if we're completely in two different weight classes, our squat could sometimes sort of look quote unquote a bit similar. But if I just look at his bench press and my bench press, we're like completely different, because he holds a really high arch, for example, whereas my style is more of a sink style bench press. So commonalities different huncha just based on leverages. But when I look at bench pressers who who would suit with a similar style of a bench press as me are guys who do a big sink. So few names like international lifters that I took a lot of inspiration was from early on. Brett Gibbs, really good, like great, amazing bench presser. But I can see some similarities as to how he sinks the barbell. We could look at David Wilson. He also sort of utilizes the sink style motion, and I can sort of see what these guys are doing while keeping the general commonalities. हुन्छ नि, what are the things like basic कुराहरु बेन्चमा के हुन्छ, यो चाहिँ फेरि मेरो र क्लिन्टनको पनि मिल्न जान्छ, even though it may look completely different. So we have to look at individuals who look very similar. I'll give one more example with Neha and Ojas as to how their deadlift is very relatively similar in terms of leverages, good external rotation, decent enough femur that they can really stack themselves really well, and they look sort of similar. So when they're learning deadlift, they can bounce ideas off of each other, and then they can really set the hips really low when they go into the deadlift, so they can bounce off ideas from each other. Whereas I'm their coach, right? They should sort of be trying to emulate my style of deadlifting with a really high hip, a lot of internal rotation, really wide stance. So that's not something that they do, but again, the general commonalities are going to be very similar. So when we're looking at leverages, it could be a point of reference. It's long femur chara pani, he's squatting so well, but why am I just getting folded over all the time when I'm squatting? So as to questions are then we can look at lifters and what they're doing correct. As to high hip position, how is Tyson doing a deadlift? So these are things. Now if your hips are also going to be high like me, then you may probably want to look at me and what are the things that I'm doing correctly in order to do the deadlift. Even the sumo and conventional, my hip position is quite high relatively. So these are things that you can take away in order from looking at technique. Second thing, don't just copy someone who's good at a certain lift. Let's say when it comes to squat, international lifters, we probably think of Raswal, or we probably think of Ashton, or we probably think of Nepal, and probably me. And I literally have people just staring at my squat and saying, I should be squatting like you because you can squat. But when it comes to bench press, they don't want to look at me at all, but they would rather look at Ayush and then just see, Ayush le यसरी bench press गर्दो रहेछ and he is strong, so I probably need to do the same way. Tyson le यसरी squat गर्दो रहेछ and I probably need to squat the same way. Mohit le यसरी deadlift गर्दो रहेछ, then I probably need to deadlift this exact way. But that's completely something that we should avoid doing just because someone is doing without any idea of the knowledge, any idea of what we're actually doing when it comes to copying हाम्रो technique. You shouldn't just look at someone who's good at certain thing and then copy, rather understand the holistic approach, the whole concept of the things that they're doing. But something again with me, when it came to copying technique, right? Once I got a bit stronger, maybe around 265, 70 kg squat range, I really started to struggle with keeping the barbell stable, and I was dealing with a lot of tremors and shakes at the bottom of a squat. So yo hunदाखेरि के भएछ हेर त small interruption, but yeah, we were talking about the squat and how I was dealing with tremors in the squat. Then I looked at athletes who have struggled with similar problems such as me, and then I could really look at guys who are actually competing in my weight category and who've recently just moved up in a weight class, and that would be I'm sure you guys know of him, SSJ Bob, how his squat was very similar to mine, a very thumbless grip, and then as he started getting bigger, he started facing similar problems. Then what he eventually got to do was starting to hold the bar with the whole grip and then move your hands out wider and wider and wider. And this is something that I reflected and bounced back with my coach as well before making the decision. And then we decided like maybe this is the reason that is causing my squat to be more, problematic. And then once this guy's problem is fixed, and then even my coach saying that this could help in stability. So this is something that we work towards. Now I copied him, of course, but not like without any thought, just because SSJ Bob does a wider hand squat and he's now a bigger guy, I should be doing as well. The opposite of the same problem could be true. But when we look at bigger lifters with bigger weights, their hand basically just moves out wider and wider, right? And that's quite a common trend. So I'm not saying like close stance naramro haina, but that's the problem I was facing. So that's something that I worked on. Now I'm a big proponent of just holding wherever it's comfortable rather than being really close and uptight. So I copied it from somewhere, but with context. So you should also, when you're copying someone's technique necessarily, you have to look at what are the problems that this guy is facing. So we just switched to the hook grip recently, and of course I have my own reasons. We talked about it in another video. Now, if you want to switch to the hook grip and you have similar problems to me, and if I have fixed it, but if my problem gets fixed, now I have a baseline for everybody who faces the similar problem as me. Maybe hook grip is the right way to do it. So त्यसरी नै problem fixing eventually over time आउँदै जान्छ. And sometimes it's just like seeing other people do their lifts, then we also change it a bit. But just because you like someone, like I'm a big fan of Keenan, I mean joke garte, we're always saying like मेरो twin हो भन्छु मैले जहिले, because he's like an Asian guy, he's a big guy and then very tall, and someone I aspire to become like Keenan someday. But that doesn't mean I just go ahead and copy his technique, because Keenan is so good at squatting, he's so good at bench pressing, and he's like a frog stance sumo deadlifter. I can't be Keenan, right? So then I have to, even though he's like my greatest inspiration in the current era, I'm not gonna just magically go and then try to be Keenan. And then like पहिला पनि अब Lane Norton थियो मेरो inspiration. So त्यस्तै हुँदाखेरि we shouldn't just copy, but if it's a similar problems that we're facing, then we should copy. कति भयो minute? And final topic where I could talk about, and this I think correlates with the first topic as well, is when your lifts don't feel right. So if it's always feeling heavy, if it's always feeling untrained, you're not strong, it consistently feels weaker, then this is somewhere then we can change our technique based on other people who have had similar issues. So with me again, we'll just come back to my squat, because I have figured most things out for my squat and my bench press over the years. So when it comes to my squatting, I always felt like, because I was a quote-unquote perfect squatter, right? So I always felt like a closer, narrower stance is going to be the most optimal, and it's really optimal up until like 70-80% range. I look perfect even now. If I'm squatting 250, I can squat perfectly with a narrower stance. But then as the weights start to get heavier, my body just naturally wants to go wider and wider and wider. If I force the narrow stance, which is good, which I felt is safer for my hips as well, that position is not really going to allow me to be really powerful. So I had to force myself into a wider stance, even if it's lighter weights, and I feel like it's not good. So I just adapted it. And when I look at, again, lifters across Jesus, Ray Williams, bigger guys, now I'm not saying I'm one of those guys, but when I look at bigger guys, Bryce, Calgary barbell guy, we look at Bob, we look at Ashton, we look at all the bigger guys with massive squats, they have eventually gone on to go with a wider stance, and then narrow stance just maybe not optimal for me. So this is something that I changed over the years, because I wasn't feeling right. Even with my bench press, right? Optimal, what is optimal? When we look at optimal bench press, we think of someone like Sean Noriega or Brett Gibbs, those guys with really high arches, really perfect soft touch. Now I can borrow their concepts. I can borrow their concepts of how to set up the arch. I can borrow their concept with how to set up the hand placement, how to set up the elbow placement, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna feel strong trying to hold the highest arch possible and trying to get a soft touch. If I try that, I will always feel heavy. The bench is always going to feel heavy. The bench is always going to feel heavy. So I have to adapt to something that suits my body type better, similar to how it suits for Sean Noriega with his style of benching. But I'm copying from these great, amazing bench pressers. But obviously, I'm not going to look exactly the same, and I can possibly never have an arch such as that. And then I lean towards what feels more comfortable for me. So then what are मैले style को गर्ने bench, who are the better bench pressers? So I think of, Jonathan Kaiko, sink bench presser, really strong. Jesus, really strong sink bench presser. Again, Keenan is not a sink bench presser. Ashton, Bob, none of these guys are sink style bench pressers. But then I look at those guys and then what those guys have consistently done in order to make their bench press better, and then that feels really strong and secure for me. So that's basically my concept as to when I should basically get after someone else's technique, not just because I like this guy, or else I'll just try to squat like Keenan and squat nothing, or try to bench like Sean Noriega or squat like Russell and then get nothing. But lean towards the trend. What are the things that have worked for them? Study them. Don't make instant choices. आज देख्यो भोलि गर्यो, भोलि मन परेन पर्सि चेन्ज यस्तो भन्दा नि find a pathway, and if you have a coach, bounce ideas off of your coach and then come up with your own original generic plan that's really gonna work for you. And yeah, I think that's everything that I have for this topic. Hopefully it helps. Hopefully you copy the right things and not the wrong things after this video. And we'll see you in the next one. If you want coaching with me or anyone from our team, links are in the description down below. And we will see you in the next one. Until then, be strong.